Welcome to Verge File.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. The shift didn't happen overnight. At least, not in a way I could see at first. But looking back, there was one moment that should have told me everything. It was a Tuesday, cold, rain tapping against the bedroom window. I'd gotten home late from work, still in my tie, still carrying the day's weight in my shoulders. She was already in bed, scrolling through her phone, her face lit in blue. I leaned over, kissed her on the cheek, and let my hand rest lightly on her side. She didn't even look up, just said she was too tired. That was the third time that week. At first, I told myself it was stress, timing, bad luck. Everyone goes through lulls, right? But those lulls started turning into a pattern. Every night, a new reason. Too tired. Headache. Early morning. Not in the mood. And yet, every morning, she'd wake up as if nothing had happened, chatting about her schedule, sipping coffee across from me at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone again. I'd sit there, answering in short replies, feeling like we were just roommates sharing the same roof. The first real crack came one Saturday night. We'd gone to a friend's birthday dinner. She laughed, drank wine, leaned in close when talking to people she barely knew. On the drive home, I thought maybe the warmth had returned. But as soon as we stepped through the front door, she walked straight to the bedroom, changed into pajamas, and said good night before I'd even taken off my shoes. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to chase her anymore. The next morning, I got up before she did. No breakfast together. No small talk over coffee. I left the house without saying a word, drove to a diner on the edge of town, and ate alone. For the first time in months, the quiet felt better than trying. That's when it started, my own pattern. She denied me every night, so I avoided her every morning. No confrontation, no emotional speeches, just distance. She didn't seem to notice at first, but I noticed something else. How much lighter I felt when I didn't have to sit across from her pretending everything was fine. She thought she had all the control. She didn't see that control slipping the moment I stopped asking. And I knew one thing for certain. Once I stopped needing her, the whole balance of our marriage would change. The first week, she didn't notice. I'd wake up before sunrise, get dressed quietly, and leave without a sound. Sometimes I'd go to the gym, sometimes just take a drive with no destination. The point wasn't where I went. It was that I wasn't there when she expected me to be. By the second week, I could feel the shift. She'd start asking casual questions at night, almost as if testing the waters. What time are you getting up tomorrow? Or, do you want me to make coffee in the morning? I'd keep my answers short, non-committal. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't offering anything either. It's funny how quickly the absence of routine becomes noticeable. Before, we'd spend mornings in that familiar blur. Her hair still messy from sleep, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Now, she was waking up to an empty space beside her, cold sheets, and a kitchen that hadn't seen me since the night before. She didn't say it outright, but I caught the signs. The way she lingered in the hallway when I was putting on my shoes. The way she looked at the empty chair across from her at breakfast when I stayed home, but didn't join her. Even the way she started dressing a little nicer in the mornings, as if to remind me what I was missing. It wasn't working. If anything, the distance made me sharper. I stopped waiting for her approval or attention to start my day. I ate when I wanted. I came and went without explaining myself. That quiet control felt better than any argument ever could. But the real turning point came one Thursday. She woke up before me for the first time in months. I came into the kitchen and found her sitting at the island, coffee ready, almost like she was staging a scene from our old life. She asked if I wanted to eat together. I told her I had somewhere to be and walked past her without taking a sip. That pause in her expression, that flicker of something she was trying to hide, told me everything. She was starting to realize this wasn't about a bad night here or there. This was a shift she couldn't control. Every morning I stayed distant. The power she thought she had at night shrank a little more. And I could tell she was beginning to wonder, if I wasn't coming to her then, and I wasn't staying for her now, who was I really staying for? It started small. She began asking where I went in the mornings, but never directly. Instead, she'd slide it into casual conversation, late at night, while folding laundry or scrolling through her phone. You've been up early lately. Must be nice to have all that free time. I'd give her nothing more than a shrug or a vague, "Yeah, it is." The less I said, the more it seemed to bother her. By the third week of my silent mornings, she tried a different tactic. I caught her checking the mileage on my truck one evening when she thought I was in the shower. She didn't say anything, just glanced at the odometer and quickly turned away when I walked in. Her suspicion was building, and I could see her struggling with it. It wasn't that she thought I was doing something specific, it was that she didn't know what I was doing. That unknown was eating at her far more than any fight would have. One Saturday, I came home mid-morning to find her dressed like she was going somewhere. Makeup done, hair perfect. She wasn't going anywhere. She was waiting. She asked if I wanted breakfast. I said I'd already eaten. That flicker in her eyes came back, the same one I'd seen when I turned down coffee the week before. She didn't like it. Not because she cared about sharing a meal, but because she wasn't the center of my day anymore. Then came the slip. She called one of my friends, pretending it was about a barbecue we'd been invited to. Later, he mentioned it to me, said she'd asked if he'd seen me lately, if I'd been acting different. She was fishing, and by involving someone else, she was admitting she didn't have access to me the way she used to. The truth was, I wasn't hiding anything dramatic. My mornings were quiet, coffee at a diner, a walk in the park, sometimes just a drive to clear my head. But the mystery was doing more damage than any confession could. She had denied me every night without thinking about the consequence. Now, I was denying her the comfort of knowing where I stood. And every unanswered question seemed to push her closer to a place she wasn't ready to go. One where she'd have to admit that whatever power she'd had over me was slipping fast. I could tell she was getting ready to make a move to pull me back. The problem for her was, I wasn't planning on stepping back into the space she thought we still shared. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I'd just returned from my usual drive when I saw her at the kitchen counter, dressed as if she was headed to an office she didn't work at. Perfect hair, flawless makeup, a crisp white blouse she hadn't worn in years. She had 2 cups of coffee waiting, hers steaming in front of her, mine untouched across from it. She didn't ask where I'd been. Instead, she smiled and slid the cup toward me. Thought we could have breakfast together, like we used to. It sounded innocent, but I could feel the weight behind it. This wasn't about coffee. This was a control move, a reset attempt. I sat down, but didn't touch the cup. She started talking about weekend plans, mentioning names of friends I hadn't heard her bring up in months. I realized she was building a script, filling the silence with pleasant distractions, waiting for me to fall back into the rhythm she'd been comfortable with. But here's the thing about silence. It becomes a habit. I'd learned to be comfortable in it, and now I was watching her squirm in the space she used to control. Halfway through her list of ideas, she made the mistake. She casually mentioned that maybe we should spend less money eating out, since she'd noticed my little morning adventures might be adding up. There it was, the dig. She couldn't help herself. It wasn't about money. It was about access. She wanted to remind me she was still monitoring, still aware, still in the loop. That was the moment I decided to pull back even harder. The next day, I left earlier than usual. I didn't come home until afternoon. I spent the time at a small coffee shop across town, reading and letting my phone sit face down on the table. No texts answered. No explanations when I returned. By the end of the week, she stopped leaving coffee out for me. The blouse went back into the closet. The smiles in the kitchen became short glances from across the room. She was retreating, and I knew why. Her play to pull me closer had only made me notice how much better I felt staying away. Her denial at night used to frustrate me. Now it was fuel. Every time she pulled back, I built another wall. Every morning I disappeared. I was reminding both of us that the balance had shifted for good. And I could sense it. She wasn't just frustrated anymore. She was beginning to panic. The first sign came on a Monday. I walked into the kitchen just as she was ending a phone call. She hung up quickly, too quickly, then asked if I was free for lunch that week. Her tone was overly casual, but her eyes were fixed on me like she was trying to read my reaction. I told her I was busy. I didn't explain with what. 2 days later, she called me mid-morning. That in itself was unusual. She never called during work hours unless it was important. I let it ring twice before answering. She said she was in the area and wanted to grab coffee together. I told her I had somewhere to be. I could hear her pause, as if trying to decide whether to push back or not, before she just said, "Okay, maybe next time." But I knew this wasn't about coffee or lunch. It was about seeing where I was and who I was with. The bold move came Friday. I was at the diner I'd been going to since this whole routine started, halfway through my breakfast, when I noticed her reflection in the window. She was across the street, pretending to look into a boutique, but her eyes kept darting toward the diner. She wasn't subtle. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge her. I finished my coffee, left cash on the table, and walked out without looking in her direction. I got into my truck, started it, and drove away slowly, giving her just enough time to know that I'd seen her. That evening, she was unusually quiet. No questions, no passive comments. Just silence. She didn't even try the usual bedtime excuses. She just rolled over and went to sleep without a word. I realized then what had just happened. She'd crossed the line from suspicion into desperation. She was following me, trying to catch me in something. Anything. That would explain why I was no longer orbiting around her. The irony was, there was nothing to catch. My mornings were exactly what I wanted them to be, mine. But the fact that she couldn't get inside that part of my life was driving her crazy. And now, I knew she was willing to escalate. The problem for her was, I was already 3 steps ahead. Her bold move didn't scare me. It gave me an opening. If she wanted to watch me so closely, I was going to give her something to see. Something that would make her question far more than my morning routine. Once I knew she was willing to follow me, I stopped hiding my movements, but not in the way she expected. The next week, I became deliberately unpredictable. Some mornings I left early and drove to the far side of town, parking in front of places I had no reason to be. Sometimes it was a small art gallery. Other days, a park bench across from the river. I'd sit there, phone in hand, scrolling without actually doing anything, knowing if she was watching, it would look like I was waiting for someone. I never rushed home. If she asked where I'd been, I'd answer with vague half-truths, just out, or had a few things to do. No details, no openings. The more I kept it thin, the more she filled in the blanks herself. It was working. She started dressing more carefully even for quick trips to the store. Her phone seemed glued to her hand. And most telling, she began leaving the house shortly after I did, even on days when she had nowhere to go. One morning, I saw her car in my rearview mirror, 3 cars back, trying to blend in with traffic. I took a random turn down a quiet street, parked for 10 minutes, then circled back toward home. By the time I returned, her car was already in the driveway. She'd clearly raced back to beat me. That night, she made dinner, something elaborate, the kind of meal she hadn't bothered with in months. She was trying to reel me back in, but I stayed polite, distant. I complimented the food without overplaying it, then excused myself early and went for a walk. This was the shift I'd been waiting for. She was reacting to me, not the other way around. Her patterns were breaking, her confidence cracking, and the more she tried to regain control, the more obvious it became that she no longer had it. But I wasn't doing this just to make her uneasy. This was preparation. I was watching her, testing her, seeing how far she'd go to confirm whatever story she'd built in her head. Because once she was desperate enough to push past suspicion into confrontation, I'd be ready. Not to defend myself, but to take everything she thought she still had and end it on my terms. I could feel that moment coming. She was too close to the edge now to pull back. And when she finally broke, it wouldn't just be a scene. It would be the point of no return. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I just returned from a long drive along the coast, salt still in the air, the smell of coffee from a roadside diner lingering on my clothes. She was waiting in the living room, sitting upright, hands clasped like she was bracing herself for impact. The second I stepped in, she launched into it. Not yelling, yet, but her voice was sharp, each word clipped. She wanted to know where I'd been, who I'd been with, and why I was acting like a stranger in my own home. I let her talk. Every accusation, every question, every desperate attempt to draw me into an explanation. I stayed standing, jacket still on, keys in my hand. When she paused, expecting me to start defending myself, I simply said, "I don't owe you an itinerary." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. She blinked, caught off guard. She'd been ready for a fight, not for me to strip the entire conversation of emotional leverage. That's when she tried a different angle, flipping it back on me. She said I had changed, that I was creating distance, that maybe she wasn't the problem here. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the way she was fishing for me to reassure her, to pull her back from whatever cliff she felt herself standing on. But I wasn't giving her that. Not anymore. I walked past her, dropped my keys on the counter, and started making myself a drink. She followed me into the kitchen, her voice rising now, the edge breaking into something closer to panic. She demanded to know if there was someone else. I took a slow sip and said, "You'd be amazed at how many things I don't tell you anymore." That stopped her cold. She froze, like she was trying to decide if I'd just admitted something or if I was simply letting her imagination run wild. Either way, I'd given her nothing concrete, just enough space for her mind to fill in the gaps. The confrontation fizzled not because she'd run out of questions, but because she realized she wasn't going to get answers. I left her standing there in the kitchen and went to my office, closing the door behind me. No slam. No final word. Just distance. She had wanted to pull me back into her orbit. Instead, she'd stepped fully into mine, where I set the terms, and where silence was my sharpest weapon. After that Sunday, I stopped waiting for her to make the next move. It was my turn to set the pace, and I wanted every step to be deliberate. The first change was financial. I moved my accounts into a separate bank, updated passwords, and rerouted my paycheck into the new one. The joint account, once our shared safety net, was now just a hollow shell with enough left in it to cover the bare minimum. No announcement. No discussion. She'd find out the next time she tried to use it. Then I took the spare key she kept hidden in a kitchen drawer. She never saw me do it. A day later, I changed the locks. If she noticed, she didn't bring it up, but I could see her checking the front door more than once, like she was trying to make sure nothing had changed. It had. Socially, I cut deeper. I stopped attending the weekly dinners with her friends. I ignored the group chats she was in. If anyone asked, I gave a polite excuse and nothing more. Within a month, invitations stopped coming to me altogether. She was now walking into those dinners alone, and I knew the questions would follow her there instead of me. Inside the house, I stripped away the small pieces of our shared life. Photos came off the shelves. Gifts she'd given me disappeared into storage. I replaced the bedspread, the dishes, even the coffee mugs. Each change was small enough to be dismissed, but together they made the place feel less like ours and more like mine. The last step was digital. I blocked her from my location sharing, removed her from certain online accounts, and turned off the smart home features she used to access. She could still live here, but she couldn't reach me anymore. Not in any way that mattered. What surprised me wasn't her reaction, it was her lack of one. She didn't confront me. She didn't cry or scream. She simply watched, as if she was realizing too late that the ground beneath her had been eroding for months. And that was the point. This wasn't a single blow. It was the slow dismantling of everything she thought was permanent. I wasn't just leaving her. I was erasing the version of myself that she thought she could control. Now there was only one step left, the exit. And when I took it, it would be quiet, final, and completely on my terms. By the time winter settled in, she was already living in the shadow of what we used to be. She moved around the house like a guest, touching things carefully, speaking less, watching me more than she ever spoke to me. She had stopped trying to pull me back. Now, she was just waiting, hoping I'd offer something she could hold on to. That's when I knew it was time. I chose a Thursday. No big reason. Just an ordinary day, the kind you never remember until something burns it into your memory forever. I woke up before sunrise, dressed quietly, and walked through the house one last time. Everything I needed had already been moved in stages: documents, clothes, keepsakes. She hadn't noticed because I'd never done it all at once. That was the advantage of leaving in silence. It didn't feel like leaving until the door closed behind you for the last time. I left my house keys on the kitchen counter, next to a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a letter. There were no explanations, no apologies. Just one sentence. This is me choosing peace. I didn't wake her. She was still asleep, wrapped in the same blanket she'd started using when she stopped reaching for me at night. I looked at her for a moment, not with anger, not with sadness, just with the kind of clarity you only get when something is finally over. Then I walked out. There was no dramatic slam of the door, no sound to mark the moment except the quiet click of the lock behind me. The truck was already packed, the engine cold from sitting all night. I started it, pulled away, and didn't look back. By the time she woke up, I would be hours away. There would be no trail to follow. Accounts closed, phone number changed, no shared locations, no mutual friends willing to bridge the gap. I'd become unreachable, not just in distance, but in existence. I wasn't leaving her for someone else. I wasn't leaving out of rage. I was leaving because staying would have meant handing her pieces of me she no longer deserved. The silence I left her in was intentional. No explanations meant she'd have to live with her own version of the story. And knowing her, that story would eat at her far more than any truth I could have given. It was over. Completely. And the best part? She wouldn't realize until much later that the moment she lost me wasn't when I walked out. It was the day I stopped letting her in. 2 months after I left, I woke up to the sound of waves instead of her voice. My mornings began with coffee on a balcony overlooking the ocean, the horizon stretching so far it felt like a clean page. Everything I owned fit into a smaller space now. The excess was gone, both in my home and in my life. No clutter, no noise. Just space to breathe. I'd picked up old habits I'd let die over the years. Running before sunrise. Reading late into the night. Cooking for myself without thinking about someone else's preferences. It was strange at first, the way silence filled the gaps where her voice used to be. But over time, I realized the silence wasn't empty, it was mine. Word of my disappearance traveled. A mutual friend sent a single message. She's been asking around. I didn't reply. I didn't need to know the details. Whatever she was telling people, whatever version of me she'd constructed to make sense of what happened, it was hers to live with, not mine to correct. I deleted her number, but sometimes my phone would light up with an unknown caller. I never answered. If it was her, she'd learned that the man she used to reach with a single text no longer existed. One afternoon, while walking along the pier, I passed a couple arguing. The woman's voice was sharp, demanding answers, while the man stood still, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. For a moment, I saw myself in him. Back when I thought explaining myself could fix something that was already broken. I kept walking. The difference now was simple. I no longer needed to be understood. I no longer needed to be believed. I only needed to live in a way that kept my peace intact. I'd left without rage, without theatrics, without a single raised voice. And yet the impact was permanent. She'd never be able to call me back into her orbit because I'd burned the map the moment I walked away. People talk about closure like it's a conversation, a final meeting, a chance to get everything out. I learned closure is just the moment you decide someone doesn't get any more of you. I didn't disappear. I just became someone she could no longer reach. And in the quiet of my new life, I finally understood the power in leaving without explanation, because the silence I left behind would echo louder than any words I could have said. That was my ending. And my beginning. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.